Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open. A few years back, some friends invited me to a 4th of July fireworks event. It was the kind of thing that sounded harmless when people first talked about it. A group of friends, some food, music, lawn chairs, a big open yard, and a lot of people standing around waiting for it to get dark enough for fireworks. Nobody was planning anything serious. It was supposed to be one of those normal summer nights where everyone relaxes, drinks a little, watches the sky light up, and tells the same stories they tell every year. But it got out of hand the way those nights sometimes do. A lot of people had brought their own fireworks. Not just the small stuff either. There were Roman candles, fountains, sparklers, loud firecrackers, and several larger shells that were clearly meant to be fired from the ground and sent high up into the air. People were lighting things off one after another, while others stood around with drinks in their hands, yelling when something exploded nicely, and laughing when a fuse took longer than expected. The mood was loose. Too loose, probably. There is a point in the evening when everyone has been drinking just enough that they begin treating dangerous things like they are toys. Nobody is trying to be reckless on purpose, but people stop paying attention the way they should. They stand too close. They forget where things are pointed. They assume someone else is watching. They laugh off warnings because everyone wants to keep the mood fun. That was the feeling of the night. It was already dark by then, but not completely black. There was still a faint glow low in the sky from the sunset, mixed with porch lights, string lights, and the flicker of fireworks going off across the yard. Every few seconds, something burst overhead. Red, green, gold, white, the usual holiday colors. The air smelled like smoke and burned powder. People were shouting over the music. Someone was grilling nearby. Kids were running around with glow sticks. A few people sat under a large tent canopy, talking and watching the fireworks from the shade. I was close enough to the action to see what was happening, but I was not directly involved in setting anything off. I was mostly watching. At that point, I had already seen enough fireworks for the night that I was more interested in standing back and letting other people take their turn. Then, one man brought out a shell. It was one of the bigger ones, maybe around 2 inches across. The kind that normally goes into a launch tube, shoots up into the air, and explodes high above everyone. When used correctly, it is supposed to fly away from people before it goes off. That is the important part. It is supposed to go up. The man lit the fuse. At first, everything seemed normal. There was that brief hiss and spark at the end of the fuse. People stepped back. A few people looked up automatically, waiting for the shell to launch. Then something went wrong. I do not know whether he lost his balance, misjudged his footing, or simply moved at the wrong moment, but he kicked the thing over after the fuse had already been lit. It happened fast. Too fast for anyone to react properly. The launch tube tipped. The shell did not go up. Instead, it fired sideways. I remember seeing the flash. That is one of the clearest details in my memory. A sudden bright flash at ground level, followed by a shape moving directly toward me. There was no time to duck, no time to turn away. No time to understand what I was seeing. 1 second, I was standing there watching a fireworks display. The next, a live shell was flying at me. I saw it coming in the split second before it hit. It looked like a streak of light and motion. Then, I felt something slam into my chest. The impact felt like getting hit with a baseball, thrown as hard as someone could throw it. Not a gentle knock, not a glancing blow, a hard, solid hit directly to the chest. The kind of impact that knocks the breath out of you before you even understand what happened. Then the world went white, not black. White, everything disappeared into brightness. I do not know whether the shell exploded immediately, whether I was thrown backward, or whether my eyes simply could not process the light. I do not remember falling. I do not remember hearing myself scream. I do not remember anyone around me shouting. There was just the impact, then a whiteout. For a brief moment, I had no sense of where I was, no sense of my body, no sense of the yard, the people, the tent, the music, or the fireworks. Just white. Then sound started coming back. At first it was distant and muffled. Voices, people yelling, someone shouting for help, the crackle of something burning, the sound of feet moving quickly over grass. Then I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was people running toward me. Paramedics were coming. I remember looking around and realizing that the tent canopy above me had been almost completely destroyed. The large canopy that had been standing over part of the yard was burned, torn, and collapsing in places. It looked as if it had been hit by a blast of fire. A couple of lawn chairs nearby had caught fire too. There was smoke in the air. People were moving away from the burning area. Someone was probably trying to put the small fires out. Someone else was probably calling emergency services. The whole scene had turned from a holiday party into chaos in seconds. And somehow, I was standing there. Or at least conscious and alive enough to understand what had happened. I remember looking down at myself. I expected to see burns. I expected my shirt to be ripped apart. I expected blood. I expected smoke coming off my clothes. I expected something. But there was nothing. My shirt was not even singed. That was the part nobody could understand. The shell had hit me in the chest. I had felt the impact. The canopy had been incinerated. The chairs nearby had caught fire. But I was completely unharmed. No burns. No cuts. No holes in my shirt. No obvious bruising at first. Nothing. It made no sense. The paramedics reached me and started checking me immediately. I remember them asking questions, checking my breathing, asking if I felt pain, asking whether I had blacked out. I must have looked confused, because I was confused. I kept trying to explain that the shell had hit me. I knew it had hit me. I felt it, but I was standing there with no visible injury. The paramedics looked around at the damage, then looked back at me. One of them shook his head. He said something like, "Go buy yourself a lottery ticket, kid." This looked like it was going to be a very different situation. That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. Everything about the scene suggested I should have been badly hurt. The canopy was destroyed. The chairs had burned. The blast had been strong enough to cause panic across the yard. And I had taken the impact in the chest. But somehow, I was okay. I remember people standing around in shock. Some were still holding drinks. Some were pale. Some kept asking whether I was all right. The man who had lit the shell looked devastated. I do not remember what he said exactly, but I remember the look on his face. He knew what almost happened. Everybody did. The mood of the whole night changed. A few minutes earlier, it had been loud, messy, carefree, and reckless in the way holiday fireworks can be. Afterward, nobody was laughing. Nobody was acting like it was just another firework mishap. The danger had become real all at once. One bad angle, One careless movement, 1 second. That was all it took. I do not think I fully understood how close it had been until later. In the moment, I was mostly in shock. Adrenaline does strange things. You can get hit hard, get scared, and still not feel the full weight of it until after everyone calms down. Your body is moving before your mind catches up. But after the paramedics checked me and people started talking about what they had seen, I began to replay it. The shell had been meant to shoot straight up. Instead, it had fired sideways. It had come directly at me. I saw the flash. I felt the impact. Then, everything went white. I started asking myself how I had not been hurt. Maybe the shell did not explode directly against me. Maybe it clipped me or struck something first. Maybe the canopy took the force of the blast. Maybe I had been hit by part of the tube, debris, or some object moving in the chaos instead of the shell itself. Maybe the impact felt like the shell hitting me, but it was actually something else. There had to be a physical explanation. But even if there was, it still felt impossible. The tent was badly burned. The chairs were on fire. The paramedics said the situation looked like it should have ended very differently. That was not just me being dramatic afterward. Someone who had arrived and seen the scene said it out loud. Years later, I can still remember the smell. Burned fabric. Smoke. That sharp chemical smell fireworks leave in the air. And underneath it, the smell of grass and summer heat. I can still remember looking down at my chest, expecting damage and finding none. I can still remember touching my shirt like I could not believe it had survived. The whole thing left me with a strange feeling. Not exactly fear, not after the fact. More like disbelief. There are moments in life when you suddenly realize how little control you actually have. You can be standing somewhere completely ordinary, surrounded by friends, doing something people do every year, and then something goes wrong so fast that there is no time to protect yourself. You do not get a warning. You do not get a chance to make a better choice. You are simply lucky or unlucky. That night, I was lucky. Very lucky. Maybe impossibly lucky. I think about the person who lit the shell too. I do not blame him in the way some people might expect. He made a mistake, and it was a serious one. But nobody there had expected it to happen. Nobody had thought, this is going to turn into an emergency. Everyone had been caught up in the atmosphere of the night. That is what makes accidents frightening. They do not always happen because someone is evil or trying to hurt anyone. Sometimes they happen because people are distracted, careless, tired, drinking, or too comfortable with things that can do real damage. A fireworks shell is not a toy. It looks like part of a celebration until it points in the wrong direction. Then it becomes something else entirely. Afterward, I became a lot more cautious around fireworks. Before that night, I had probably treated them the way most people do. They were loud and fun. You stood around, watched, laughed, and assumed somebody knew what they were doing. Afterward, I understood how fast things can change. I never forgot the moment I saw that flash coming toward me. It was one of those moments where the brain records everything in tiny pieces. The angle of the shell, the sudden flare, the impossible speed, the feeling in my chest. Then, the white. People sometimes talk about seeing their life flash before their eyes. I did not have that experience. I did not see memories. I did not hear some dramatic inner voice. I just disappeared into brightness for a second. Then I came back to the world and saw paramedics running toward me. I remember how strange it was that I was not lying in pain. I remember feeling my body almost cautiously, as if I expected something to hurt once I noticed it. But I was okay. A little shaken. Probably sore later. But okay. The canopy was not okay. The chairs were not okay. The area around me looked like something violent had happened. But I walked away without even a singed shirt. That is why it still feels unreal. If I only remembered the impact, maybe I could convince myself I had exaggerated it in my mind. Maybe I had been hit by something minor and panicked. Maybe the blast had not been as close as it felt. But the scene afterward was real. The burned canopy was real. The chairs on fire were real. The paramedics were real. Their reaction was real. And the fact that I was standing there unharmed was real. I do not know exactly what saved me. Maybe the shell struck at an angle that changed everything. Maybe some part of the tent structure absorbed the blast. Maybe the timing was just barely in my favor. Maybe the impact I felt was the shell or debris bouncing off something before it hit me. Maybe I was protected by nothing more than a few inches of luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful, because the outcome could have been horrifying. Instead, I have a story that still makes me shake my head. A 4th of July party, a crowded yard, people drinking and lighting fireworks. One shell knocked sideways after the fuse was already burning. A flash racing straight toward me, a hit to the chest. The world turning white, then paramedics running over while a tent canopy burned above me. And somehow, I was completely fine. No burn, no wound, no torn shirt, nothing. Just a reminder that sometimes you walk away from something you should not have walked away from. And when you do, there is not much to say except what the paramedic told me. Go buy yourself a lottery ticket. We lived in this apartment for a while, and from the beginning, it had a strange feeling to it. Not an obvious haunted house feeling. It was not falling apart, there were no creepy portraits on the walls, and we did not move in expecting anything unusual. It was just an apartment. We needed a place to live, it was available, and at first it seemed normal enough. But little things started standing out. The garage floor had these dark stains that would not come out. They were old stains, deeply set into the concrete. Not the kind of fresh mark you could explain by saying someone spilled motor oil or dropped paint. They looked like they had soaked in years ago and become part of the floor. No matter how much the space was cleaned, they stayed there. We noticed them early on. At first, it was nothing more than a passing comment. One of us would point at the stains and say they looked strange. The other would shrug. Garages get stained. People keep cars, tools, boxes, chemicals, and all kinds of junk in garages. There are plenty of ordinary reasons a concrete floor might have ugly marks on it. Still, they were hard to ignore. Then there was one bedroom that was always freezing, not cold in the way a room gets cold, because the heat is not turned up enough. This room felt different from the rest of the apartment. You could walk down the hallway and feel the temperature change when you reached it. Sometimes the rest of the place would be comfortable, even warm, and that one room would still feel icy. We checked vents. We checked windows. We checked whether the door had been left open. We tried to explain it logically. Maybe there was poor insulation. Maybe a window did not seal properly. Maybe a vent was blocked, or the room was positioned in a way that caught cold air. All of those things were possible. But sometimes it seemed too extreme. It had this sharp, unpleasant coldness, the kind that made you want to leave the room rather than just grab a blanket. You could stand in the doorway and feel it. It was not constant in a perfectly predictable way either. Some days it would be manageable. Other days, it felt like the room had been left open to winter weather even when it had not. Because of the stains in the garage and the freezing bedroom, we started joking about it. That is what people do when something makes them uncomfortable, but they do not want to admit it. We would joke that someone had been murdered there. We would joke that the apartment had ghosts. We would say things like, "That room is where it happened." or don't go into the garage alone, then laugh and move on. At the time, it was just a joke. We did not seriously think the place was haunted. We did not think there was a real connection between an old stain, a cold bedroom, and anything terrible. We were just living in an apartment with a few weird details. The kind of details that seem more interesting when you are bored or sitting around late at night. Then the laundry started happening. That was the first thing that made the jokes stop being funny. One morning, I got up before my wife. That was normal for us. I was usually the early one. I would get out of bed first, start moving around the apartment, make coffee, get ready for the day, or deal with whatever needed doing before she woke up. That morning, I came downstairs and saw something strange. Every one of my wife's sweaters and every one of my flannel shirts that had been in the clean laundry had been buttoned up and laid neatly across the back of a chair. Not tossed there, not folded in a pile, not left on the arm of the couch. Buttoned, arranged, placed carefully over the chair back as though someone had taken the time to dress them, then display them. At first, I just stood there looking at them. It was such a strange sight that my mind did not immediately know what to do with it. The clothes had been in the clean laundry. I knew that. My wife's sweaters and my flannel shirts were not normally buttoned and placed on chairs. We did not have some routine where we did that. It was not how either of us organized laundry. The way they were arranged was what made it unsettling. It looked deliberate, like someone had stood there in the quiet of the apartment, taken each shirt one by one, fastened the buttons, smoothed the fabric, and laid them across the chair. There was no reason for it. No note. No explanation. No mess around the chair. Just clean clothes, neatly arranged. I looked around the apartment. Everything else seemed normal. Nothing was broken. The doors were locked. There was no sign of anyone else being there. I remember thinking maybe my wife had done it. That was the obvious explanation. Maybe she had gotten up before me without waking me, decided to deal with the laundry, and gone back upstairs. Maybe she had been half asleep and did something unusual. Maybe she had started folding clothes late the night before, and I had forgotten. But I knew she was still upstairs. And when I asked her about it, she had no idea what I was talking about. She came downstairs, looked at the chair, and froze. Her reaction did not seem fake. I know people can perform surprise. I know someone can pretend to be scared if they want to mess with you. But this was not that. She looked genuinely unsettled. She looked at the clothes, then at me, then around the room as if she expected to find an explanation hiding somewhere. She asked if I had done it. I said no. We both stood there for a while, trying to figure out who could have. There was no good answer. I always got up before she did, so it was hard for me to believe she had come downstairs, buttoned up all the clothes, arranged them on the chair, and then somehow gone back to bed without me noticing. And I was not the one who did it. The first time, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe one of us had done it absent-mindedly. Maybe we were both tired. Maybe it had happened earlier and neither of us remembered. But the fact that neither one of us could explain it stayed with us. Then it happened again. Not necessarily in exactly the same way every time, but the same basic thing kept occurring. Clean clothes would be arranged strangely. Sweaters and shirts would be buttoned and placed over the back of a chair. Things that had been in the laundry would appear organized in a way neither of us would normally do. Every time, it created the same argument. Did you do this? No. Are you sure? Yes. Did you? No. It is a strange thing to slowly lose trust in something so small. You do not want to accuse the person you live with of lying over laundry. That sounds ridiculous. But when something keeps happening and both people deny doing it, you start wondering whether the other person is forgetting, joking, hiding something, or simply not telling the truth. I never thought my wife was lying. Her fear was too real, and I know I was not doing it. So the apartment began to feel different. The garage stains started looking darker. The cold bedroom felt colder. The jokes about ghosts stopped sounding entirely like jokes. Then the garage door began acting strangely. It would open on its own, or close on its own. Not constantly, but enough to make us notice. Sometimes we would hear the garage door moving when nobody had touched the opener. You know that sound. The motor starts, the door shifts, the metal track rattles, and suddenly a part of the house that should be sealed is opening or closing by itself. At first, we assumed the remote was malfunctioning. That is a normal thing. Garage door systems can be weird. Batteries die, remotes get stuck, signals interfere. Someone nearby might have a similar frequency. The mechanism itself can fail. We told ourselves that was what it was. But once you already have unexplained clothes, strange stains, and a freezing room, a garage door opening on its own does not feel like a normal mechanical problem. It feels like the apartment is doing things around you. At night, if we heard the garage door move, we would stop whatever we were doing and listen. Sometimes one of us would go check. Sometimes neither of us wanted to. There is a difference between being curious and wanting to stand alone in a garage with old stains on the floor, knowing the door has just opened by itself. Still, we never found anything. No one standing outside, no missing items, no evidence someone had entered, no damaged lock, no obvious problem with the motor, just another thing we could not fully explain. Then came the phone call. I was visiting friends when my wife called me in a panic. I could tell from her voice immediately that something was wrong. She was speaking quickly. She sounded confused, frightened, and almost angry at the same time. I asked what happened, and she told me there was a news crew outside the apartment. At first, I thought maybe something had happened in the neighborhood. A fire, a police situation, an accident. Something involving a nearby house. But she told me they were trying to find the home of a woman who had been arrested for murder. And they had our address. For a second, I thought there had been a mistake. News crews get things wrong sometimes. Addresses get mixed up. Maybe they were looking for someone in the complex. Maybe the woman had lived nearby. Maybe someone had given the wrong apartment number. But the more my wife spoke, the worse it sounded. The woman they were looking for had lived in our apartment before us. She had been arrested in connection with the murder of her husband. The details were horrifying, though we did not know all of them at first. What we learned was that she had concealed his remains in a storage locker, then stopped paying the rent on the locker. Eventually, the storage unit went unpaid long enough that its contents were auctioned off, and whoever bought it got a terrible surprise. When I heard that, everything in my head connected at once. The garage stains, the freezing bedroom, the clothes buttoned and arranged over the chair, the garage door opening and closing, all the jokes we had made about murder and ghosts. None of it proved anything supernatural, of course. It could all have had normal explanations. The stains might have been old oil or paint. The bedroom might have had an insulation problem. The garage door could have been malfunctioning. The clothing could have been some kind of misunderstanding, a strange habit one of us had forgotten, or something we never figured out. But hearing that someone who had lived in our apartment had been arrested for killing her husband changed the way we looked at everything. Suddenly, the stains were not just stains. The cold room was not just cold. The apartment did not feel like an ordinary place with a few quirks anymore. It felt like a place with a history we had unknowingly walked into. Then it got even worse. The news crew showed my wife a picture of the woman. My wife recognized her. She had met her. A few months before all of this became public, the woman had come back to the apartment looking for a pair of cats she had abandoned when she moved out. That detail still creeps me out. My wife had opened the door and spoken to her without knowing who she was. The woman had apparently been looking for the cats she had left behind. Maybe she had expected them to still be there. Maybe she thought someone knew where they had gone. Maybe she was just desperate, confused, or trying to reclaim some last connection to the apartment. At the time, my wife had no idea who she was. She just knew a woman had come by asking about cats. Later, after seeing her picture on the news, she realized it was the same person. The same woman connected to the murder. The same woman who had lived in our apartment before us. That was the moment when the whole story stopped feeling like a creepy coincidence and started feeling personal. The woman had been at our door. She had stood outside our home. She had asked about animals she had abandoned. And we had been living in the place she left behind, seeing strange things we could not explain. I remember feeling sick when I heard the full story. Not only because of the murder itself, but because of the way our minds had been playing with the possibility without knowing the truth. We had joked about murder, we had joked about ghosts, we had looked at the garage stains and laughed nervously. Then we found out there really had been something terrible connected to that apartment. Maybe the stains had nothing to do with it. Maybe the cold room was only poorly insulated. Maybe the clothes were never paranormal at all. But it was impossible not to wonder. The clothes were the part I could never get over. Why sweaters and flannel shirts? Why button them up? Why lay them across the back of a chair? It was such a specific, domestic action. It was not like a door slamming or a shadow in a hallway. It felt intimate, like someone doing laundry, like someone preparing clothes for another person, like an old routine continuing after the person who used to do it was gone. I do not know what kind of relationship the woman had with her husband before everything happened. I do not know whether he wore flannel shirts. I do not know whether she had a habit of buttoning clothes. I do not know whether any of that was relevant. Maybe it was not. Maybe our brains connected the details afterward because people are wired to make stories out of fear. But when I came downstairs and saw those clothes carefully arranged, it felt like someone had been there. Someone patient, someone quiet, someone who had time to button every shirt. The garage door was another thing that became harder to dismiss. A garage is already an unsettling space when you are alone at night. It has tools, boxes, old smells, concrete floors, shadows, and corners where you cannot see clearly. Ours had those stains that would not come out. Once we knew the apartment's history, every time the garage door opened by itself, we imagined the worst. Was it just faulty wiring? Was a remote signal triggering it? Was a neighbor's device interfering? Or was something in that apartment still moving around after we had gone to bed? We never got an answer. We did not see a ghost. We did not hear a voice. We did not find someone hiding in the garage. There was never a final moment that proved the apartment was haunted. That is part of why it stayed with me. Everything had an explanation if you took it one piece at a time. Old stains happen. Cold rooms happen. Garage doors malfunction. People forget doing things. Laundry gets moved. Someone can show up looking for abandoned cats. And terrible people can live in ordinary apartments without anyone knowing what they have done. But when you put all of those pieces together, it becomes hard to feel completely rational about it. The apartment had felt wrong before we knew anything. Then we learned the truth. Maybe we had been picking up on nothing more than the building's flaws and our own imagination. Maybe the news story gave us a reason to turn every weird moment into evidence. Or maybe something in that place had been trying to make itself known. I do not know. All I know is that my wife's reaction was real. I know I did not button up those clothes and lay them across that chair. I know she did not seem capable of faking that kind of fear. I know the garage door moved on its own more than once. And I know that one day, out of nowhere, a news crew showed up looking for a woman accused of murdering her husband. A woman who had lived at our address. A woman my wife had unknowingly met at the door. A woman who had returned asking about the cats she left behind. Even now, when I think about it, I picture the chair, the clean sweaters, the flannel shirts, every button fastened, everything laid out neatly, waiting for someone to come downstairs and find it. That is the image that still bothers me most. I was probably 5 or 6 years old when this happened. I cannot remember the exact year, but I remember the house. I remember the landing outside my bedroom. I remember the narrow white staircase, the banister rail, and the light my mom always left on for me at night, because I was scared of the dark. I had always been afraid of the dark when I was little, not in a dramatic way during the daytime. I could play in the house normally. I could go upstairs, go to the bathroom, and walk through the rooms without thinking twice. But once it got late, and the lights went out, everything changed. Familiar corners looked deeper. The hallway felt longer. The stairs seemed steeper. The same rooms I knew perfectly well during the day started to feel like they belonged to someone else. The landing outside my bedroom was one of the places that bothered me most. Our house was an old townhouse, and it had that narrow, tall layout that old houses often have. The stairs were white, or at least painted white, and there was a banister rail running down beside them. From my bed, I could look straight out through my doorway and see the landing. That was why my mum always left the light on. She knew I needed it. With the landing light on, I could see the stairs clearly. I could see the banister. I could see the doorway to the bathroom. I could see enough of the upstairs area to feel like nothing could be hiding there. The light was part of my bedtime routine. It mattered to me more than it probably seemed to anyone else. I would lie in bed and look out at the pale stairway and the lit landing, and it gave me just enough comfort to fall asleep. The white walls, the light on the floor, the familiar outline of the bathroom door, all of it made the dark feel less dangerous. That night, I had gone to bed the same way I always did. The landing light was on. My mum was in her room. The house was quiet. I had no reason to think anything strange was going to happen. I remember falling asleep normally. I do not remember the dream that woke me up. I only remember waking suddenly, as if I had been pulled out of sleep instead of naturally opening my eyes. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. That half-awake feeling is hard to describe. You are awake enough to see the room around you, but part of your mind is still caught in the dream. Your body feels heavy. Your thoughts move slowly. You are confused by ordinary things because you have not fully returned to reality yet. I was lying in bed staring directly out into the landing. At first, I expected to see what I always saw: the narrow white staircase, the banister rail, the warm landing light, the bathroom door, a quiet, empty upstairs hallway. But that night, it was not empty. There was something on the landing. At first, I could not understand what I was looking at. The figure was black. Not just dark because it was standing in shadow. It seemed black in a way that stood out against the pale walls and the light from the landing. It was shaped like a person, tall enough that I knew immediately it was not an animal or a piece of furniture. It looked like it was wearing a hood, a black hooded figure. And it was moving, not walking normally, not standing still. It was darting around the landing in quick, strange movements. The only way I can explain it is that it reminded me of the kind of sudden, jerky movement you see in found footage horror movies, where something seems to move in a way that is too fast and too wrong to look human. It would appear near one side of the landing, then shift sharply. It moved low and quickly, then stood still for a second, then moved again. I remember being frozen in bed. I did not scream. I did not call for my mum right away. I could not move. I was still partly asleep, and I think my brain was trying to decide whether I was dreaming. Maybe that was why I kept staring. I expected the thing to disappear if I blinked or rubbed my eyes. But it did not. It kept moving. The landing light was on, and that was almost worse. If the hallway had been completely dark, maybe I could have told myself I was imagining shapes. But I could see the stairs, I could see the wall, I could see the banister, and I could see the figure. It was dark against everything else. Then it noticed me. I do not know exactly how to explain that moment, except to say that it stopped moving. It turned toward my room, and it stared back at me. Its eyes were glowing, not softly glowing, not reflecting light like an animal's eyes might in the dark. They were bright blood orange, like two little suns. That is the image that stayed with me more than anything else. The eyes looked impossible. They looked ridiculous in a way that should have made them less frightening, but they were not funny at all. They were too bright, too orange, too alive. Against the black hood and the pale landing, they stood out like two burning points. I remember staring directly at them. I do not know how long it lasted. It might have been only a few seconds. But when you are 5 or 6 years old and you are lying in bed looking at something you cannot understand, a few seconds can feel like an hour. I was terrified, but I also could not look away. I think part of me was waiting for it to move first. I was afraid that if I blinked, it would be closer. I was afraid that if I looked away, it would come into my room. So I stared at it, and it stared at me. Then it darted away again. It moved sharply to the left, toward the bathroom. The bathroom was just out of view from my bedroom doorway. I could see enough of the landing to see the figure move in that direction, but once it reached the bathroom area, it disappeared from my direct line of sight. Then, the bathroom light came on. I saw the change in brightness immediately. The warm landing light was already on, but the bathroom light added another bright patch at the end of the hall. It was like someone had walked in, reached up, and flicked the switch. Then I heard the bathroom door close. Not slam, just close. A normal, unmistakable door-closing sound. That was the moment when fear turned into panic, because whatever I had seen had not just been a shadow moving around the landing. It had gone into the bathroom. It had turned on the light. It had closed the door behind it. I remember lying there for one more second, maybe two, trying to process what had happened. Then I moved. I did not carefully climb out of bed. I did not stop to think. I threw the covers off and ran. My bedroom was on one side of the landing, and my mum's room was to the right. I sprinted from my bed, across the floor, through the doorway, and toward her room as fast as I could. I remember the cold floor beneath my feet. I remember the hallway light flashing past me. I remember refusing to look toward the bathroom door. I did not want to see whether the figure was standing there. I did not want to see the orange eyes again. I just wanted to get to my mum. I rushed into her room, slammed the door behind me, and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking felt like the safest sound in the world. My mum woke up, confused and half asleep. She probably heard the door slam and immediately wondered what was wrong. I do not remember every word I said at first because I was crying or panicking too much. But I remember asking her about the man in the bathroom. I asked something like, "Is the man in the bathroom gone?" That was the question I remember. The man in the bathroom. To me, it was completely real. My mum was barely awake. She was trying to understand why I had run into her room in the middle of the night. She probably thought I had a nightmare, or that I had seen something in the dark and scared myself. She said, "Yes, he's gone. Come to bed," she said it in the calm, half-awake way parents sometimes do when they are trying to settle a frightened child without fully knowing what happened. She did not get up and check right away. She did not ask 100 questions. She just told me he was gone and tried to make space for me in the bed. I dove into bed beside her, but I did not feel safe yet. I lay there staring at my mum's bedroom door. I remember watching it like I expected the handle to turn at any moment. I expected the bathroom figure to come down the landing, stop outside the room, and try to get in. I expected to see orange light under the door. I expected to hear something moving in the hall. Nothing happened. The house stayed quiet. My mum went back to sleep more quickly than I did. I stayed awake for what felt like an hour, staring at the door. I was too scared to close my eyes. Every creak of the old townhouse made me tense. Every small sound made me think the bathroom door was opening. I listened for footsteps on the landing, for the sound of someone moving down the stairs, for a low voice, for anything, but nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep in my mum's bed. When I woke up in the morning, the house looked normal again. The landing was empty. The bathroom was empty. The staircase was white and narrow and familiar. The banister was just a banister. There was no hooded figure, no glowing eyes, no strange presence. The bathroom door was open and the light was off. It was daylight, and daylight has a way of making frightening things feel impossible. I remember looking around and trying to understand how I could have been so scared the night before. In the morning, the landing did not look haunted. It looked small. It looked ordinary. It looked like the same upstairs area I had walked past 100 times. But the memory did not go away. I never had a night terror before that night, and I have never had one since. That is part of why it stayed with me. If I had been someone who regularly sleepwalked, woke screaming, or had nightmares every week, maybe I would have accepted it more easily. Maybe I would have said it was just another night terror. But I had never experienced anything like that before. I had never woken up and seen something so clear. I had never felt that split between being awake and dreaming. I had never run into my mum's room convinced someone was in the bathroom. And I never had that experience again. For years afterward, I thought about it. I tried to explain it in different ways. Maybe it was a night terror. That is the most likely explanation. Children can wake suddenly from a dream and see things that are not really there. The brain can still be partly asleep while the eyes are open. A familiar room can become mixed with dream images. A shadow can become a figure. A light can become glowing eyes. The sound of a normal door or pipe might become part of the dream. I know all of that. Maybe I woke up from a nightmare and saw the hallway in a distorted way. Maybe the black hooded figure was created by my imagination. Maybe the orange eyes came from the landing light reflecting in some way. Or maybe they were only part of the dream. Maybe I heard the bathroom door close at another time. Or perhaps I imagined it because I expected the figure to move somewhere. That is possible. But when I remember it, it does not feel like a dream. I remember the landing light. I remember the exact view from my bed. I remember the narrow white staircase. I remember the bathroom door closing. I remember sprinting into my mum's room. I remember locking the door, and I remember the exact question I asked her. Is the man in the bathroom gone? Maybe I was still dreaming while I did all of that. Maybe I had a night terror so vivid that my mind carried it with me into the hallway. Maybe I only thought I saw the bathroom light come on. Maybe I only thought I heard the door close. But it felt real. That is why it stuck with me. The figure itself is still difficult to think about. It did not look like a normal person, dressed in black. It looked wrong. Too dark, too fast, too sharp against the pale stairway. The way it moved is what scared me most. It did not walk like someone who belonged in the house. It darted. It shifted. It seemed to appear and disappear across the landing. And when it noticed me staring, it stopped. Then those eyes looked straight at me. Blood orange, bright as little suns. When I got older, I became embarrassed by the memory for a while. I thought it sounded too much like a child's nightmare. A black hooded figure with glowing orange eyes, moving around a landing, then running into a bathroom and turning on the light. It sounded like something my 6-year-old brain would invent after seeing a scary movie or hearing a story I should not have heard. But I did not remember watching anything like that before it happened. And even if I had, that does not change the fear of it. To a child, fear does not need to be logical to be real. I was not thinking about dream psychology. I was not analyzing shadows. I was not considering sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucinations or anything else adults might use to explain it. I was 5 or 6 years old. I was scared of the dark. I trusted that the landing light would keep the upstairs safe. Then I woke up and saw something standing where the familiar landing should have been. For years after that, I did not like looking out of my bedroom door at night, even when the light was on, even when I knew the stairs were empty. I would still picture the hooded figure moving across the landing. I would picture it stopping. I would picture those orange eyes turning toward me. Sometimes I would pull the blanket up and face the wall instead. Sometimes I would ask my mom to leave extra lights on. Sometimes I would run past the bathroom at night because I did not want to stand near the doorway too long. The landing became different after that night. It was still the same staircase, the same white walls, the same banister rail. But I had seen something there, or I had dreamed something there. Either way, my mind never completely separated the place from what happened. The strangest thing is that the bathroom light detail still bothers me the most. A shadow is easy to explain. A scary figure is easy to blame on a dream, but the light turning on and the door closing felt like the figure had interacted with the house. It made it seem physical. It made it seem like it had gone somewhere. It was not just standing at the end of my bed. It was moving through the landing. It knew the layout. It went into the bathroom. It shut the door. That is the part that made me feel like I was not just looking at a nightmare. I was watching someone in the house. I will never know for certain what it was. Maybe it was the only night terror I ever had. Maybe my mind created the whole thing from shadows, exhaustion, fear of the dark, and the strange half-awake state between sleep and reality. Maybe I was dreaming while I ran into my mom's room. Maybe the figure was never there, but I know that I have never forgotten it. I can still picture the landing exactly as it was. I can still picture the white stairs and banister. I can still see the black hooded shape moving in quick bursts. And I can still remember lying beside my mom afterward, staring at her bedroom door for what felt like an hour, too afraid to close my eyes. I never had another night terror after that. Not one. But that one was enough to stay with me forever. We will return to the next story in just a moment. If you have been enjoying the tapes so far, subscribing to Last Lantern Tapes is the best way to make sure you do not miss the next collection. New stories arrive for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every shadow feels a little closer. You can also leave a like or share the story that unsettled you most tonight. Now, let's go back to the tape. I worked in this ancient factory once. the kind of place that had been standing for so long that nobody could really look at it as just a workplace anymore. It was not one building. It was more like a whole maze of buildings that had been added to, connected, repaired, expanded, and patched together over generations. The factory itself was huge, with different sections built in different decades. Some parts looked old but maintained. Other parts looked old in a way that made you wonder how they were still being used at all. The lab I worked in was attached to the main facility, but it felt separate from it. You could get there through connected hallways and doors, but once you entered the lab building, the atmosphere changed. The factory side was usually louder. Even when it was not busy, there were always industrial noises somewhere in the background. Machines humming, fans running, pipes ticking, forklifts moving, metal doors closing, people talking through radios. The lab was quieter, too quiet sometimes. It had offices, long fluorescent lit hallways, work areas, storage rooms, and the kind of clean but old surfaces that never quite stopped looking worn down. The walls had probably been painted many times over the years. The doors had layers of old paint around the hinges. The floors were scuffed from decades of people walking the same routes every day. The place had been there since the 1890s. That fact always stayed in the back of my mind. It was hard not to think about it when you worked there late at night. The factory, lab, and offices had been around for more than a century. Whole generations of people had worked there. People had probably spent their entire adult lives walking those halls, taking breaks in those rooms, sitting at those desks, working overnight shifts, getting sick there, getting promoted there, losing jobs there, maybe even dying there. By the time I worked there, the place had layers of history built into every room. I was scheduled for a 12-hour shift that crossed midnight. Those were the longest shifts mentally, especially when you were stuck in an isolated part of the building. During the day, the lab had enough activity to feel normal. People came in and out. You heard doors open, phones ring, carts move, conversations in the hallway, somebody asking for help, somebody complaining about equipment, someone laughing in another office. At night, all of that disappeared. And on this particular night, it was a holiday. That made it worse. A holiday overnight shift in an old factory is not like a normal night shift. On a normal night, there might still be enough people around that you can hear life moving through the building. Maybe someone is on the floor. Maybe maintenance is working somewhere. Maybe security passes through often enough that you do not feel totally alone. But that night, almost nobody was there. The whole facility was massive, and there were maybe a dozen people in it. Possibly less. Not a dozen people in my building. A dozen people in the entire place. The factory was so large that you could walk for several minutes through hallways, work areas, stairwells, and connecting passages without seeing another person. During the day, that was just part of the job. At 1 a.m. on a holiday, it felt like being inside an abandoned city. The lab building was almost completely empty. I was the only person in it. Security was not due to pass through for another few hours. So I was alone. Actually alone. That is an important difference. Sometimes people say they are alone when they mean there are people in another room, or someone else in the same building, or coworkers nearby who could hear them if they called out. This was not like that. I knew there was no one in the offices, no one in the lab area, no one in the hallway, no one in the storage rooms, no one who should have been walking through the building at 1 a.m. I was sitting in the office portion of the lab, reading a book to pass the time. There was nothing dramatic about the moment before it happened. I was not listening to scary stories. I was not watching horror videos. I was not already nervous. I had settled into the shift the way you do when you know the night is going to drag on. I had probably made coffee earlier. Maybe I had checked the clock too many times. Maybe I had already walked around once or twice just to stay awake. Then I sat down with my book. The office area was quiet except for the low hum of lights and equipment. Fluorescent lights always sound louder when you are alone. During the day, you do not notice them. But in an empty building, you begin to hear everything. The faint electrical hum above you, the air system turning on and off, the tiny clicking noises from old heating vents, the occasional pop from pipes somewhere behind the walls. At first I was reading normally. Then I heard someone come into the lab. I did not hear a voice. I did not hear a loud door slam. I just heard the sounds that told me someone had entered. A door moving. A step. Then another step. The sound of someone walking around. At first, I did not think much of it. My first thought was that security had arrived early. That would have been normal enough. Security sometimes changed their route. Maybe someone had decided to check the lab sooner than expected. Maybe another employee had come in to grab something. Maybe someone from the factory floor had been sent over to look for equipment or paperwork. I kept listening. The footsteps moved through the lab. They were not rushed. They did not sound like someone running. They sounded casual, like someone walking through a place they knew well. That was what made it feel strange later. The footsteps did not hesitate. They did not sound confused. Whoever it was seemed to know exactly where they were going. The pace was steady, not heavy, not dragging, not dramatic. Just normal footsteps moving through an old lab building in the middle of the night. I looked up from my book. For a few seconds, I waited for the person to appear in the hallway. The office portion of the lab had a hallway that ran past the offices. If someone came through the main lab area, they would usually pass that hallway eventually. It was not a complicated route. If they were walking around, I expected to see them. I heard movement again. A door, perhaps. Then footsteps. I thought I saw someone walking out. It was only a quick glimpse. A figure passing near the end of the hallway, just at the edge of my vision. I did not see a face. I did not see enough detail to know exactly who it was, but it looked like someone had walked past. I looked down the hallway. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. Not someone had just turned the corner empty. Empty, there was no door closing. No footsteps continuing away. No sound from another room. Nothing. I stood up. At first, I was still trying to be logical. Maybe the person had stepped into one of the side rooms. Maybe they had gone into the storage area. Maybe they were in the lab itself, and I had only caught a glimpse of them moving past the doorway. So I walked out into the hallway. The lights were on, but the building still felt dark. That is another strange thing about old industrial spaces. You can have bright fluorescent lights overhead and still feel like the building is full of darkness. The ceilings are high. The hallways are long. There are windows that show nothing but black outside. There are rooms beyond rooms, each one holding more equipment, more doors, more old corners. I looked down one end of the hallway. Nothing. I looked down the other end. Nothing. I checked the nearest office. Empty. I checked the lab entrance. Empty. There was nobody there. I called out once, not loudly, just enough to see if someone would answer. Hello? Nothing. No reply. No footsteps. No sound of someone laughing or saying they were there. The whole lab was silent again. I remember standing in that hallway, trying to convince myself I had not heard what I heard. Old buildings make sounds. That was the first explanation. Maybe the door had shifted because of air pressure. Maybe pipes had made a series of noises that sounded like footsteps. Maybe a vent had kicked on and carried sound strangely through the hallway. Maybe I had seen a shadow from a moving light, or something reflected in a window. All of that was possible. but it did not feel like that. I had heard someone come into the lab. I had heard them walking around. Then, I had thought I saw someone walking out, and when I looked, there was no one there. I went back into the office, but I did not really return to reading. The book stayed open in front of me, but I kept looking toward the hallway. Every small sound made me pay attention. The building was still doing what old buildings do. The lights hummed. Something clicked in the walls. A pipe made a low knock somewhere far away. But now, everything felt different, because I had heard footsteps where nobody should have been. I kept thinking about security. Maybe they had come through quietly. Maybe they had walked by and I somehow missed them. But that did not make sense. Security was not due for another few hours. Even if they had arrived early, I should have seen them. The hallway was visible from where I was sitting. They would have needed to pass through an area where I could have spotted them. And why would they walk around without saying anything? The lab was not a public place. If someone entered at 1 a.m. and saw someone working alone, they would normally say something. At the very least, they would acknowledge you. They would ask if everything was okay. They would check in. They would not just walk around silently and disappear. I tried to get through the rest of the shift. That was harder than it sounds. The time moved slowly. Every 10 minutes felt like an hour. I checked the clock constantly. I kept wondering when security would finally come through. I knew the building was not technically empty, but the people who were there might as well have been miles away. There is a special kind of fear that comes from being alone in a huge place that was built for hundreds of people. The silence becomes too large. You start noticing the absence of normal human sounds. No footsteps, no talking, no doors opening, no phones ringing, no carts rolling down a corridor, just the building breathing around you. At some point during the shift, I remembered something coworkers had told me. Apparently, there was a story about a man in a lab coat. They said people had seen him walking through the hallways before. Not everyone believed it. Obviously, it was one of those stories workers pass around because old workplaces collect stories. Someone sees something after a long shift, someone else hears about it. Then, years later, there is a rumor that a ghost in a lab coat walks past offices and disappears. The story was that he would walk by. Sometimes, people saw him only from the side. Sometimes they saw the outline of a lab coat. Then, he would disappear. I had heard the story before, but I had never taken it seriously. Not really. Every workplace has its haunted story guy. Every old building has a rumor. It could have started from one tired person seeing a reflection. It could have been a prank. It could have been a misunderstanding that got bigger every time someone told it. But that night, alone in the office, I could not stop thinking about it. I had not clearly seen a lab coat. I want to be honest about that. I only saw a quick shape moving past the hallway. It might have been a person. It might have been a shadow. It might have been nothing. But when I remembered the coworker's story, I felt cold. Because I had heard the footsteps before I saw anything. I had heard someone come into the lab. I had heard them walking around. Then, I had seen a figure moving away. Then there had been nobody there. That sequence felt too close to the story. I did not go searching for it. That is one thing I know for sure. I did not decide to walk every hallway, open every door, or prove I was brave. I stayed near the office. I did what I had to do. I kept the lights on. I kept my phone nearby. I waited for security. When security finally did come through, I felt relieved in a way that was almost embarrassing. It was just another person walking through the building. A normal person. A real person. They made normal sounds. They opened the door. They spoke. They moved through the space in a way that made sense. I remember wanting to ask if they had been by earlier. I do not remember whether I asked directly that night, or later. But I know I eventually tried to find a normal explanation. Maybe security had changed their route. Maybe another employee had entered the building without me knowing. Maybe someone had been working in another section and walked through the lab. But there was no clear answer. Nobody was supposed to be there. That was the problem. The lab should have been empty. I should have been alone. And according to the schedule, I was. The factory had been around since the 1890s. That is more than 100 years of night shifts. More than 100 years of people sitting in that office area, working overtime, reading to stay awake, listening to the building settle, hearing unexplained sounds, walking the same hallway, locking the same doors. It makes you wonder how many people had done exactly what I was doing. How many workers had sat in that chair and looked up because they heard footsteps? How many had thought they saw someone pass through the corridor? How many had dismissed it because they were tired? How many had kept quiet because they did not want to sound stupid? The idea of it bothered me, not because I was certain the place was haunted. I was not. There are many normal explanations for strange things in old industrial buildings. Sound travels in weird ways. Long hallways create echoes. Air systems can make doors move. Reflections can make shadows look like people. Exhaustion can make your brain interpret a vague shape as a human figure. And a 12-hour shift across midnight is exactly the kind of situation where your mind can play tricks on you. I know that. But I also know what it felt like. I was awake. I was reading. I heard someone come into the lab. I heard them walk around. I looked up and thought I saw someone walking out. Then I went into the hallway and found nobody. No security, no coworker, no explanation. Just an empty hall in a building that had been standing since the 1890s. It scared the hell out of me. For the rest of the time I worked there, I never completely relaxed during overnight shifts. I could still do my job. I could still sit in the office and pass the time. But whenever I heard footsteps in the lab, I looked up. Whenever I saw movement in the corner of my eye, I checked the hallway. Whenever someone mentioned the lab coat story, I did not laugh as easily as I had before. Maybe it was just an old building. Maybe it was a tired brain. Maybe it was a real person who passed through and I somehow missed them. Or maybe, for a few seconds on a holiday night, I saw someone who had been walking those halls long before I ever arrived. I will probably never know. But I still remember the sound of those footsteps. Slow, normal, confident, coming through an empty lab at 1 in the morning. And then, nothing. Maybe this was not the scariest thing that ever happened to me, at least not in the usual ghost story way. Nobody appeared in front of me. Nothing spoke. I did not see a face in a window or hear footsteps coming down a hallway. But it is one of the things I still think about. It happened when I was a teenager and home alone one evening. It was probably around 7 o'clock. The day had been cooler than usual, and the sun was already starting to go down. The light outside had that dull orange-gray look it gets right before night takes over. Everything in the neighborhood was still visible, but the day was fading fast. I was making food on the stove. It was nothing special, just some simple meal I was trying to cook for myself while nobody else was home. I was facing the stove, focused on the food, waiting for it to be done. The kitchen was small, really small. The stove was only a few feet across from the sink, maybe 4 feet or so. The sink had dishes in it, along with some water sitting at the bottom. The whole place was tiny. It was the kind of small house that, looking back, probably should not have been rented out at all. My family was poor at the time, and we lived where we could afford to live. The house was behind another main house, almost like a converted back unit. It was small, cramped, and not built in a way that made you feel especially safe. The main house faced east, while ours sat behind it, fenced in on almost every side. There were chain-link fences around the property. To the south and west, we had normal neighbors. On the north side, just across a short fence, there was a small two-story apartment building that was used for drug rehabilitation. People came and went from there, but it was not always loud or chaotic. It was just part of the area. They had a medium-sized black dog named Snowball that would bark at us sometimes. I remember Snowball because in a place like that, you notice the small normal things. The dog barking through the fence, people coming home from work, cars stopping near the front house, the sounds of the neighborhood. You learn what belongs there and what does not. That evening I was alone in our tiny kitchen, standing at the stove, trying to finish cooking. Then the floor exploded beneath me. That is the only way I can explain how it felt. There was a huge boom directly under my feet. Not like a gunshot, not like someone slamming a car door, not like a heavy object falling. It sounded bigger than that. It sounded violent. It sounded deep. It was like a grenade had gone off under the kitchen. The noise was loud enough to hit me physically. I felt it through my feet and up my legs. The floor seemed to jump. The air in the room changed instantly. It was not only a sound, it was pressure. A hard, sudden blast. The sink reacted too. Most of the water in it flew up and out, splashing across the kitchen and hitting me in the neck. That part is still so strange to me. The boom was strong enough to shake water out of the sink and onto me, but when I looked around, nothing in the room seemed broken. No cabinet doors had flown open. No glass had shattered. No pipes had burst. No water was pouring out from anywhere. There was no dust falling from the ceiling. No obvious crack in the floor. Nothing. For a second, I just stood there. I think my brain stopped working. I was staring at the stove, then the sink, then the floor, trying to understand what had just happened. The food was still on the stove. The kitchen was still standing. The water had splashed out, but there was no sign of an actual explosion. Then fear caught up with me. I grabbed a knife in my BB gun. Looking back, I know that sounds ridiculous. A knife and a BB gun were not going to protect me from anything serious. But I was a teenager, alone, scared, and living in a rough part of Central California. In that moment, I did not know whether someone had thrown something at the house, whether there had been a bomb nearby, whether someone was breaking in, or whether the ground itself had just exploded. I just wanted something in my hands. I ran outside. The yard was darkening by then, but there was still enough evening light to see the fences, the main house, and the spaces around us. I looked toward the south fence. Nothing. I looked toward the west. Nothing. I looked toward the rehab apartments across the north fence. No one was standing there. No one was running away. No one was yelling. There was no smoke, no fire, no broken fence, no hole in the ground, no car speeding off. Nothing that matched the sound I had heard. That almost made it worse. If there had been someone outside, I could have understood it. If I had seen a person running, I would have known at least that the boom came from something human. If a trash can had blown apart, if a transformer had sparked, if a car had crashed nearby, if someone had fired something into the yard, there would have been an explanation. But the neighborhood looked ordinary, too ordinary. The same fences, the same dull evening light, the same quiet houses, the same black dog somewhere nearby. It was like the sound had happened in another world and somehow passed through mine. I stood outside for a while, listening. Nothing followed. There were no sirens. No neighbors came out asking what happened. No one shouted from the apartments. No doors opened. That was strange because the boom had been huge to me. It had sounded loud enough that everyone nearby should have heard it, but nobody seemed to react. Maybe they had. Maybe someone inside another building heard it and assumed it was something else. Maybe it had not traveled as far as I thought. Maybe the sound had been louder inside the little house because of the way the structure was built. But in that moment, it felt like I was the only person who had experienced it. The first thing I checked was my dog. She was a tiny pit bull, built like a sausage. She had that short, compact shape where she looked tougher than she really was, but she was mostly just happy to see people. She had been tied up outside near the kitchen area. I remember moving toward her quickly, worried she might have been hurt or terrified. But she was completely fine. She looked up at me the same way she always did. Her tail was probably moving. She was happy to see me. She did not seem panicked. She did not seem injured. She did not seem like she had just heard or felt a massive blast right beside her. That threw me off even more. I expected her to be barking. I expected her to be pulling at the leash. I expected her to be hiding, shaking, or at least acting different. But she was normal. Maybe she had been scared for a second and settled quickly. Maybe dogs react differently. Maybe she had not experienced the boom the way I had. But she gave me no sign that something huge had happened directly under or beside the kitchen. I checked her over anyway. No injury, no blood, no sign that anything had fallen on her, no reason to think the explosion had come from outside. Then I went back toward the house. I did not want to go inside right away, but I knew I had to figure out what had happened. I was worried about a gas line. I was worried about plumbing. I was worried the floor had somehow cracked. I was worried there was something under the house. The kitchen sat over an area I could inspect from outside. So I went around and looked underneath the house. That was another part of the place that always felt wrong. The building was so small and cheaply built that there were areas beneath it where you could look into the crawl space. It was dark, dusty, and full of the usual sounds you hear under old or poorly built houses. Rats. That was normal. You could hear rats moving inside the walls sometimes. Little scratching sounds, quick scurrying, the kind of thing you tried not to think about too much because there was nothing you could do immediately. That was just part of living in a place that was old, small, and not in great condition. So when I looked under the kitchen, I expected darkness, dirt, pipes, and maybe rat sounds. That was exactly what I found. No damage. No water leaking, no exposed pipe, no broken line, no hole in the ground, no signs that anything had exploded. Nothing looked disturbed. I remember crouching there, staring into the dark beneath the house, trying to figure out how the floor could have shaken that hard without leaving any evidence behind. There had been no water leaking inside the kitchen either. That was important, because if a pipe had burst or something had hit the plumbing, there should have been water everywhere. The sink water had jumped out because of the force, but the pipes themselves seemed fine. I checked as much as I could. I looked at the walls. I looked around the base of the house. I looked at the kitchen floor from inside. Nothing. The little house was exactly the same as it had been before the boom. Except now I was scared to stand in it. I remember thinking about a friend of mine named King. King had told me once that his apartment complex in that city had been bombed. Actually bombed. Not just shot at, not vandalized, not damaged in some vague way. He claimed someone had set off a real bomb there. That story had always stayed in the back of my mind because of where we lived. It was not a quiet, wealthy neighborhood where you assumed everything had an innocent explanation. People knew bad things could happen. There were guns. There were fights. There were people dealing with things you did not want to get involved in. So when I heard that boom, I thought about King's story. For a few seconds, I honestly thought maybe someone had bombed us. Maybe something had gone off beneath the house. Maybe a device had been thrown into the yard. Maybe someone had tried to hit the back unit. But there was no damage, no broken windows, no smoke, no fire, no crater, no shrapnel, no smell of burning. Nothing. And the more I looked, the more impossible it felt. A blast powerful enough to shake the floor and throw water out of the sink should have left something behind. Even if it had happened nearby, I should have seen some sign. A damaged wall, a broken fence, a scorched spot, a neighbor outside, a car alarm. Something, but there was nothing. I remember going back into the kitchen after checking outside and under the house. The food was still there. The stove was still on. The water was on the floor and my neck was wet. Everything else was normal. That contrast was almost creepy in itself. A few minutes earlier, I had been cooking alone, probably thinking about nothing important. Then the floor beneath me had erupted with a noise that felt like it came from inside the ground. Then I was standing in the same kitchen, with no proof anything had happened. I probably cleaned the water up. I probably finished cooking or turned the stove off. I do not remember exactly what I did afterward, only that I could not stop thinking about the boom. That night, every little sound made me nervous. The rats in the walls sounded louder. A car passing outside made me look toward the window. The dog moving around outside made me jump. I kept expecting something else to happen. Another boom, a knock at the door, a neighbor yelling, a police car. Anything, nothing happened. The night went on normally. No one came to the house. No one asked if we were okay. No maintenance person arrived. No emergency vehicles showed up. The next day, there was still no obvious damage. No cracked floor, no leaking water, no broken pipe, no burned patch of ground, no sign that anything had happened at all. That is what has always stayed with me. Not only the sound, not only the way the sink water hit me, but the fact that nothing explained it afterward. I have tried over the years to think of normal causes. Maybe it was some kind of underground pressure release. Maybe a pipe shifted violently beneath the house without breaking. Maybe a transformer exploded somewhere farther away, and the sound traveled through the ground or the small structure in a weird way. Maybe a truck hit something nearby, and the vibration carried through the street. Maybe someone slammed a heavy dumpster, dropped machinery, or set something off in the neighborhood, and the noise was amplified by the way our tiny house sat behind the main one. Maybe there was a small earthquake or ground movement I never knew about. Maybe something in the main house shifted. Maybe the house itself was built so poorly that a normal nearby vibration felt like a major blast inside the kitchen. All of those explanations are possible, but none of them fully match how it felt. The boom did not seem to come from the street. It did not seem to come from a neighbor's house. It felt like it came directly from underneath me, like the earth under the kitchen had punched upward. The sink water jumping made it feel even more physical. It was not just a loud noise in my head. Something had shaken the room hard enough to move water, and my dog being completely fine still confuses me. She was right outside near the kitchen. She should have reacted. Even if she did not understand what happened, I expected her to be barking or scared. Instead, she was happy to see me. Normal, like nothing had happened. I do not live there anymore. I do not even live in that state anymore. That little house, the main house in front, the fences, the neighbors, the rehab apartments, Snowball the black dog, all of it is far away now. It is part of another time in my life. But every once in a while, I remember that kitchen. I remember the stove. I remember the sink full of dishes and water. I remember the cooler evening and the sun going down. Then I remember the boom, that impossible deep blast under my feet. The feeling of the whole floor jumping, cold water hitting the back of my neck. Me running outside with a knife and a BB gun, scanning the yard and finding absolutely nobody. Then crouching under the house and finding nothing except darkness, pipes, and rats moving in the walls. No answer, no damage, no proof. Just a moment that still does not fit. Maybe there is a completely ordinary explanation. Maybe some sound from the neighborhood hit the little house in the exact right way. Maybe the vibration was real but came from farther away than I thought. Maybe I was young, scared, and living in a place where every loud noise already felt dangerous. That could be it. But I know what I felt. I know that something powerful moved through that kitchen. And I know that after all these years, I still do not understand what it was. I live on the second floor, and this happened on one of those nights when I could not fall asleep no matter how tired I felt. It was late. I do not remember the exact time, but it was somewhere in that stretch of night when the whole house had gone quiet and everyone else was supposed to be asleep. I usually fell asleep anywhere between 11 at night and 2 in the morning, depending on the day. Most nights I could lie down, watch something for a while, and eventually drift off. But every now and then, my mind would not slow down. I would be tired physically, but not sleepy enough to actually fall asleep. My body would feel heavy, but my thoughts would keep moving. On those nights, I usually watched YouTube until I felt my eyes getting too heavy to keep open. It was not something I did constantly, but sometimes it was the only way I could make myself tired enough to sleep. That night was one of those nights. I was in my room with the lights off, lying in bed and watching videos on my phone. The light from the screen was the only thing bright enough to see by. It made the room look strange, blue-white in small patches, while the rest stayed dark. My room was quiet at first, or at least it seemed quiet. I was not watching anything especially scary. I was just trying to distract myself until I felt tired enough to put my phone down. But after a while, I started noticing little sounds around me. At first, I ignored them. Old houses and apartments make noises at night. Floors settle, pipes shift, furniture creaks. Sometimes you hear something from another room and have no idea what caused it. Usually, it is nothing. But this was different. It sounded like something was moving on the carpet. Not loud footsteps. Not the clear sound of a person walking around. More like a soft brushing sound. A faint dragging or shifting sound, like something lightly touching the carpet and moving across it. Then there would be another sound, a small tap, a soft scrape, something brushing against something else. I stopped watching the video and listened. The sound stopped too. For a moment, I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was the fabric of my blanket shifting. Maybe I had moved my foot against the carpet without realizing it. Maybe it was a noise from downstairs traveling strangely through the floor. Maybe my phone audio had made some random sound that blended into the room. I went back to watching YouTube. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again. A faint movement. A brushing sound. Something low to the ground. That was the part that made it uncomfortable. It did not sound like someone standing in the room. It sounded closer to the floor, like something crawling across the carpet, or something being dragged lightly over it. I looked around. My room was dark except for the glow of my phone. I lifted the phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut across the floor, the walls, the corners of the room, and whatever furniture was around me. I looked under the bed. I looked toward the closet. I looked near the door. Nothing. The room looked completely normal. The light from my phone made everything look worse somehow. Every corner seemed darker outside the beam. The carpet looked flat and empty. The door was closed. Nothing was moving. I turned the flashlight off and went back to bed. But I was no longer relaxed. Once you start listening for something, every small sound becomes suspicious. The house settling becomes footsteps. A pipe becomes a whisper. A piece of clothing brushing against a chair becomes someone moving around in the hallway. I tried to ignore it. I kept watching videos, but the strange little sounds kept happening. Not constantly. That would have been easier in a weird way. If there had been a loud noise every few seconds, I could have called someone or gone downstairs, but it happened just enough to keep me unsettled. A soft rustle. Then silence. A faint brushing sound. Then silence again. Every time it happened, I flashed my phone's flashlight around the room. Every time, I found nothing. Eventually, I had to use the bathroom. I had been putting it off because I did not feel like leaving my room. I was already uneasy, and the thought of walking through the dark hallway made it worse. But after a while, I could not ignore it anymore. I sat up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The light was bright against the dark room. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing, no brushing sound. No movement on the carpet. No tapping. Just silence. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The upstairs corridor was dark. The light from my phone only showed a small section at a time. The rest of the hallway disappeared into shadow. I moved slowly, holding the phone in front of me. I went to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, washed my hands, and tried to act normal. Nothing happened while I was in there. That almost made me feel silly. Maybe I had just been tired. Maybe I had let myself get scared because I was alone upstairs with the lights off. Maybe the noises had been nothing. Maybe I had been working myself up for no reason. I left the bathroom and started walking back toward my room. To get there, I had to pass the stairs leading downstairs. The staircase was dark. I did not want to look down it. That is the thing about stairs at night. They are normal during the day, but in the dark they become a space you cannot fully see into. The lower floor might as well be another world. You can see the first few steps, maybe the railing, maybe a patch of wall, but everything below becomes black. I walked past the stairs with my phone in my hand. For a second I looked down at the screen. Then I saw something in the corner of my eye. Something gray. Something low to the ground. It rushed toward me on all fours. I turned toward it immediately. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The stairs were empty. The floor was empty. I stood still, holding my phone up. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I tried to tell myself I had not seen anything. Maybe it had been a shadow from the phone light. Maybe it was something moving in my peripheral vision because I had turned too quickly. Maybe it was a coat, a bag, a piece of furniture, or something on the floor that my brain turned into a shape. But it had looked like it moved. It had looked like it rushed at me. Not slowly, not like a person walking. Fast, low on all fours. The image lasted less than a second, but it was enough. It looked gray and messy, almost like a blur of limbs or fabric or something crawling too quickly to understand. I could not see a face. I could not see clear features. I could not tell whether it was an animal, a person, a shadow, or something else. All I knew was that it had seemed to rush toward me. Then it was gone. I did not stand there trying to investigate. I hurried back to my room. Maybe I ran. I do not remember exactly. But I know I got inside as fast as I could, shut the door, and got into bed. I left the lights on that night. I did not care if it made it harder to sleep. I did not care if I looked ridiculous. I wanted the room bright. I wanted to be able to see the door, the floor, the corners, and the space under the bed. I lay there staring at my room for a long time. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every small sound made me tense. I kept expecting to hear the brushing sound again, or to see something move across the carpet. But nothing else happened that night. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but I did not sleep well. For the next few days, I tried to act like it had not bothered me. I told myself I had been tired. I told myself I had seen something in the corner of my eye, and my brain had filled in the rest. Peripheral vision is strange. You can see movement without seeing detail. When you are tired and already nervous, your mind can turn a shadow into almost anything. That explanation made sense, at least during the day. At night, it was harder to believe. A few days later, I could not sleep again. It was another late night, the same kind of night where I was lying in bed, waiting to feel tired enough to finally fall asleep. I did not want to leave my room at all. I did not want to use the bathroom. I did not want to walk past the stairs, but after a while, I felt like I had to. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, thinking about the last time. I told myself it would be different this time. I would not walk through the hallway in the dark. I would turn every light on. I would not give my mind a chance to imagine things. So I turned on the light in my room. Then I turned on the hallway light. The corridor was bright enough now that I could see clearly from one end to the other. The stairs were still there, but they did not look as deep or as threatening. The carpet looked normal. The walls looked normal. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I went to the bathroom. I kept the lights on. I moved quickly, but tried not to run. I did what I needed to do, washed my hands, and left. Nothing happened. There was no gray shape, no movement near the stairs, no brushing sounds, no strange feeling. I walked back down the hall toward my room, feeling almost relieved. Maybe I had been right. Maybe I had just been tired. Maybe I had scared myself over nothing. I went into my room. I turned off the corridor light. Then I closed my bedroom door. After that, I turned off the light in my room too. The room went dark. I sat on the edge of my bed. For a moment, I actually felt better. I thought, nothing was there. Maybe I was just going crazy, ha ha ha. I was trying to laugh it off in my own head, trying to convince myself it had all been imagination. Then something hit my door. Hard. It sounded like something had run straight into it. Not a gentle knock. Not the house settling. Not a pipe. A sudden impact, like a body hitting the other side of the door. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. I did not move. I did not breathe properly. For a few seconds, I could not even think. The sound had been too clear. Something had hit the door. The hallway outside was dark because I had just turned off the light. My bedroom was dark too. The only thing I could see clearly was the outline of the door against the wall. I stared at it. Waiting, I expected the handle to move. I expected something to scratch at the wood. I expected another impact. I expected footsteps moving away. But nothing happened. The silence after the sound felt horribly long. It might have only been a few seconds. It might have been a minute. But when you are sitting in the dark, after something crashes into your bedroom door, time stretches out. I kept looking at the handle. I waited for it to turn. It did not. I waited for a shadow to pass under the door. Nothing. I waited to hear someone breathing outside. Nothing. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I forced myself to move. I got into bed slowly. I pulled the blanket over myself, but I did not feel safer. I lay there facing the door, trying to convince myself it had not happened. Maybe something had fallen in the hallway. Maybe there was a draft that moved the door. Maybe the house shifted. Maybe someone downstairs had bumped into something and the sound traveled up through the walls. Maybe I had imagined it, but I knew what it sounded like. Something had hit the door. The rest of the night, I barely slept. Every time I started drifting off, I would wake up again and look toward the door. I kept expecting another sound. I kept expecting the door to open. I kept expecting that gray shape to crawl underneath it or rush across the room. Nothing else happened. No more impacts. No more brushing sounds. No more movement on the carpet. Eventually, morning came. And with daylight, everything looked normal again. The hallway was empty. The stairs were just stairs. The door had no marks on it. There was nothing scratched into the wood. Nothing knocked over outside. Nothing on the floor that could explain the sound. I checked anyway. I looked around the hallway. I checked near the stairs. I looked at the carpet. Nothing. That was almost worse. If I had found something, I could have blamed it. A fallen object. A pet. A loose piece of furniture. Anything. But there was nothing. After that, it did not happen again. At least, not so far. I still think about it sometimes. I think about the soft sounds on the carpet that first night. I think about how I kept flashing my phone light around the room and finding nothing. I think about walking past the stairs and seeing that gray thing rushing toward me from the corner of my eye. And I think about the door. That one sound. That hard impact. The way I had just told myself I was imagining everything, only for something to slam into my bedroom door from the other side. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I was close to sleep and my brain was creating images and sounds. Sometimes people see things in the corner of their eyes when they are sleep deprived. Sometimes they hear things that are not there when they are stuck between being awake and dreaming. That could be what happened. Maybe the gray shape was nothing more than a shadow. Maybe the sound on the door was part of a dream that started before I realized I had fallen asleep. Maybe every strange detail has a normal explanation. I hope so. But when I think back to it, the memory still feels real. I remember the cold hallway light. I remember my phone in my hand. I remember the stairs beside me. I remember the shape rushing toward me. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in complete silence after something hit my door. It has not happened again since then. But I still do not like walking past the stairs late at night. And when I hear a soft brushing sound on the carpet, I always turn on a light. It is still one of the strangest experiences I have ever had, mostly because it did not feel like a normal nightmare. I have had nightmares before. Everyone has. You wake up scared, your heart is racing, and after a few minutes you realize it was only a dream. Even the really vivid ones usually start falling apart once you are awake. You remember pieces of them, but they lose their power when you look around your room and see that everything is normal. This was not like that. Every time I woke up, I was completely convinced I was awake. I could see my room. I could move around. I could think clearly enough to make decisions. I could touch things and walk across the floor. Nothing seemed dreamlike at first. That was what made it so disturbing. The dreams did not start in some impossible place or with something obviously strange happening. They started with me waking up in my own room, believing everything was normal. At the time, I had been experimenting with meditation practices that were supposed to help with lucid dreaming and visualization. I was interested in the idea of being more aware inside dreams, not because I wanted to do anything supernatural, but because I thought it sounded interesting. I had read about people using meditation to become more conscious of their thoughts, remember dreams better, and create things in their minds with more detail. One of the practices involved imagining a chest in the room with you. The idea was simple at first. You would sit or lie down, calm your breathing, and picture a chest somewhere in the room. You were supposed to visualize it clearly, what it looked like, where it sat, how heavy it was, what kind of wood or metal it was made from, whether it had a lock, and what you might put inside it. Then, over time, you were meant to imagine placing things into it. Memories, thoughts, worries, ideas, anything you wanted to separate from yourself for a while. It was supposed to be a mental exercise, like guided imagery, a way of focusing your attention and building a stronger imagination. Some people treated it like meditation, some treated it like dream preparation, and some treated it like a kind of next-level lucid dreaming practice. At first, I thought it was harmless. I would sit quietly and picture the chest near a wall or in a corner. I never got to the point where it felt completely real. I was not seeing a full treasure chest appear in front of me like it was physically there. But after a while, I started feeling like the practice was affecting the way I noticed my room. Not in some dramatic way, just small things. I would look at a blank part of the floor and briefly imagine there was something there. A small object. A paperclip. A coin. A scrap of paper. Something that had not been there before, but looked as if it could have been. For a second or two, it felt almost convincing. It was not like I truly believed I had created anything. I knew it was visualization. I knew my brain was filling in details because I had been practicing the same thing over and over. But it was still interesting. It felt like I was getting better at making my mind create images that matched my surroundings. I never thought it would lead to anything frightening. I had not been using drugs. I had never experimented with hallucinogens. At that point in my life, I had not even smoked weed. I was not trying to push my mind into some altered state with substances. Everything I was doing was completely sober and, as far as I understood it, harmless. I was simply curious about meditation, dreams, and how vivid the mind could become. Then one morning, something happened that made me stop immediately. I do not remember exactly what time I went to sleep the night before. Nothing unusual happened before bed. I had probably done my usual meditation practice earlier in the evening, maybe spent a few minutes trying to visualize the chest in my room, and then eventually went to sleep. The room was familiar. The bed was familiar. The door was familiar. There was nothing wrong with anything when I fell asleep. Then I woke up. The first awakening felt completely normal. I opened my eyes in my own bed and saw my room exactly the way it should have looked. The light in the room was dim, the way it often is early in the morning before the sun is fully up. I could see the edges of furniture. I could see the door. I could see the familiar shape of the room around me. Nothing seemed unusual. I did not feel scared. I did not feel confused. I did not have that strange dream feeling where you know something is wrong but cannot explain why. I felt awake. I felt ordinary. I felt like I had simply slept through the night and was now getting up to start the day. I got out of bed. I remember the feeling of putting my feet on the floor. I remember the room being slightly cool. I remember walking toward the door like I had done hundreds of times before. The door was closed. I reached for the handle and opened it. There was nothing on the other side. Not a hallway. Not darkness in the normal sense. Nothing. The doorway opened into complete blackness. It was not the kind of darkness you see in a room with no lights. It was not shadow. It was not a hallway with the lights turned off. There was no wall, no floor, no outline of anything. It was just a solid black emptiness filling the space where the hallway should have been. For a second, I stood there trying to understand it. My brain did not immediately panic, because I was still assuming there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was too dark to see. Maybe the hallway light had burned out. Maybe I had woken up before sunrise and my eyes had not adjusted. But it was darker than that. The blackness did not look empty. It looked deep. It looked like the doorway no longer led anywhere. I remember leaning forward slightly, trying to see into it. Then it pulled me in. There was no hand, no figure, no sound. The darkness simply seemed to rush toward me, or maybe I fell into it. I cannot tell which. One moment I was standing at my bedroom door, and the next, I felt myself being dragged forward into that black space. It was not like falling downstairs. It was more like being sucked through something. There was a sudden loss of direction. The floor disappeared. The room disappeared. Everything disappeared. I remember the sensation of my stomach dropping, the same way it does when you miss a step or when an elevator starts too quickly. Then I woke up again. I was back in my bed. This time I sat up immediately. My heart was racing, but I was relieved. I remember telling myself, that was a dream. Of course it was a dream. I had been meditating about creating things in my room. I had been thinking about visualization, lucid dreaming, and mental imagery. My brain had turned that into something strange. It was unsettling, but nothing more than a dream. I looked around my room carefully. Everything was normal. The walls were where they should be. The furniture was where it should be. The door was still closed. There was no black void. There was no chest. There was no paperclip floating in the air or any other strange sign that something was wrong. I felt embarrassed for being frightened. I was older than a child. I knew dreams could be vivid. I knew waking from a nightmare can make things feel real for a few minutes. I took a slow breath and told myself to relax. Then I got out of bed again. This time I moved more carefully. I walked to the door and stood there for a second before opening it. I do not know why I hesitated. Maybe some part of me was still afraid that I would see the same blackness. Maybe I was testing myself, trying to prove that I was actually awake. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was there. Normal, completely normal. There was carpet beneath my feet. The walls were in the right places. The light looked ordinary. I could see the familiar stretch of hallway leading toward the bathroom. Nothing was wrong. I felt a rush of relief. That first dream had been just that. A dream. I had overreacted. I even remember feeling a little ridiculous as I walked down the hall. My body was still tense, but I told myself that was only because I had been startled awake. The hallway looked so normal that I started to feel foolish for ever thinking anything strange had happened. I headed toward the bathroom. Everything worked the way it should. The lights came on. The sink was where it always was. The mirror reflected my tired face. I looked a little pale, maybe sweaty, but that was understandable after a nightmare. I used the bathroom. It was an ordinary, boring moment, the sort of thing that should have grounded me completely. I remember thinking that this was proof I was awake. Dreams do not always include small, normal details like that in a convincing way. If I was standing in my bathroom, using the toilet, seeing the familiar tile and hearing the water run, then surely I was really awake. I finished. Then I flushed. At first, nothing seemed strange. The water swirled as it always did. The sound of the flush filled the small bathroom. Then, the water began to darken. Not gradually, in a normal way. It did not look like the toilet was clogged or that something had come up through the pipes. The center of the bowl became black. The swirling water turned into a spinning circle of darkness, like the drain had opened into somewhere much deeper than it should have. I froze. For 1 second, I was too confused to react. Then, the blackness started pulling toward me. Again, there was no hand, no creature, no voice. Just the impossible sensation that the darkness in the toilet bowl had become a hole and was drawing me in. The bathroom seemed to tilt. The floor felt unstable beneath my feet. I grabbed for something, but there was nothing to grab. The sink, the wall, the door, all of it seemed too far away. The black swirl widened, and the sound of the flushing water became louder, deeper, almost like a roaring sound. Then I was pulled forward. The same falling feeling hit me, the same drop in my stomach, the same sense that reality had disappeared around me. And then I woke up for the third time. This time, I knew something was wrong. I woke up in my bed, completely terrified. I sat up so fast that I nearly fell forward. My body was covered in sweat. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The room was dark but familiar, and for several seconds I did not trust it at all. I did not move right away. I just sat there, staring at the door. I was afraid to open it. Not because I thought there was someone outside, not because I thought a monster was waiting in the hallway. I was afraid that the doorway itself would become black again. I was afraid that if I touched the handle, I would wake up somewhere else. I was afraid that I was still dreaming. That was the part that bothered me most. The first time, I had assumed I was awake. The second time, I had been even more certain. I had walked through the hallway. I had turned on lights. I had gone into the bathroom. I had done something completely normal. I had thought I had proved to myself that I was back in reality. And it still had not been real. So when I woke up the third time, I had no way of immediately knowing whether this was the real awakening or just another layer of the dream. I sat in bed for a long time. I looked around at small details, the marks on the wall, the familiar shape of furniture, the way the light came through the window, the sound of the house around me. I touched the blanket. I pressed my hand against the mattress. I rubbed my face. I tried to focus on physical sensations because I needed proof that I was actually awake. Everything felt real. But the other dreams had felt real too. Eventually, I reached for something near the bed and held it in my hand. I remember examining it closely, looking for something wrong or different. I may have looked at the clock more than once. I may have checked my phone. I needed something repeatable, something that would not suddenly change into darkness or swallow me. Nothing did. The room stayed normal. The door stayed closed. The floor remained beneath my feet. The bathroom did not turn into anything impossible. Slowly, I began to believe that I was actually awake. But I was still terrified. I did not go back to sleep right away. I do not think I could have if I tried. I stayed awake, probably with lights on, trying to calm down. My body felt like it had been through something physical, even though I knew it had been a dream. I was shaking. My skin felt clammy. Every time I looked toward the bedroom door, I felt a tightness in my chest. I kept thinking about the meditation practice, the chest, the visualization, the little things I had been imagining in my room. Maybe it had nothing to do with the dream. Maybe I simply had a false awakening nightmare, something that can happen when you are stressed, sleeping badly, or thinking a lot about lucid dreaming. That was probably the truth. But it did not feel separate in the moment. I had been practicing ways to imagine objects into existence inside my own mental space. I had been trying to make my room feel more vivid in my mind. I had been thinking about creating something that was not actually there, but looked as though it belonged there. Then I had a dream where my actual room became unstable. First, the door led into nothing. Then, the bathroom became a hole. It felt like my mind had taken the practice too literally, as though I had spent too much time trying to imagine openings, objects, and altered versions of my surroundings. And then my dream turned the whole room into something I could no longer control. The idea of lucid dreaming stopped being interesting after that. I had wanted to become more aware in dreams. I had wanted to have more control. But in those false awakenings, I had the opposite experience. I thought I was awake and in control, only to realize that the room itself could change without warning. I could walk toward a familiar door and find nothing behind it. I could do something as ordinary as going to the bathroom and suddenly be pulled into darkness. There was no control in it, only the feeling that reality had become unreliable. I abandoned the meditation practice that day. I stopped trying to visualize the chest. I stopped trying to create small objects in my room with my imagination. I stopped reading about lucid dreaming and altered states. Maybe that was an overreaction. Maybe it was just one unusually vivid nightmare. Maybe the meditation had nothing to do with it at all. But I did not care. I had no interest in testing it again. I did not want to see whether I could make the chest appear more clearly. I did not want to see whether another false awakening would happen. I did not want to open my bedroom door and find blackness waiting on the other side. I did not want to flush a toilet and feel the world disappear beneath me. I did not want to wake up a fourth time and wonder whether that one was real either. This all happened before the movie Inception came out. At the time, I did not have that reference point for layers of dreams or waking up inside another dream. I had heard of lucid dreaming, but I had not seen it represented in a way that made it seem familiar or understandable. So when it happened, it felt completely personal and completely wrong. It felt like I had somehow broken a rule without knowing what the rule was. Not a supernatural rule, not necessarily anything mystical, but a mental boundary. I had been trying to push into my dreams, trying to affect the way I imagined my surroundings, and then I had an experience where my mind created a version of reality that kept trapping me inside it. Even now, I can explain it rationally. False awakenings happen. Lucid dream practices can make dreams more vivid. Meditation and visualization can affect the kinds of images your brain produces while falling asleep or waking up. Stress, sleep patterns, and expectation can all make dreams feel more intense. I understand that. I do not think I opened some literal doorway. I do not think the darkness was a real place waiting behind my bedroom door. I do not think I was being pulled into another dimension through a toilet. But the fear was real. The feeling of standing in my own room, opening the door, and seeing nothing but blackness was real enough to stay with me. The feeling of waking up again, convincing myself everything was normal, then being swallowed by another impossible void, was real enough to make me abandon something I had enjoyed. And the final awakening, sitting up soaked in sweat and unsure whether I was actually awake, was one of the most helpless feelings I have ever had. I never went back to that kind of meditation. I never tried to manifest the chest again. I never tried to create paper clips, objects, or altered details in my room. I never had any interest in becoming more aware inside dreams after that. Reality is enough for me. I am perfectly happy with doors opening into hallways, toilets flushing normally, and waking up only once in the morning. I will take reality exactly as it is. We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.